Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the Harrogate series. Harrogate is a large borough, one of the 11 districts of North Yorkshire. It's got 139 civil parishes. Which one are we in this episode? Welcome back to Harrogate again, everybody. Now behind me there you can see a sports pavilion. We're beginning this one at a sports ground. There are actually two major features in this area of the parish though. One of them is the sports ground. The other one I'll show you by turning the camera around here. You can see this road leads to a gate which my car is sort of parked in front of, but people still can get through said gate over there. That is not a field, that is an airfield instead, and it belongs to the parish of Dishforth. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Dishforth. This week in Harrogate, we return to the eastern side of the A1 as we come to a place called Dishforth, one of the larger villages in this part of North Yorkshire. Dishforth literally means ditch ford, alluding to a crossing over a shallow stream. Without a doubt, when most people think of Dishforth, one thing always springs to mind: a former RAF base. Whilst the Harrogate area may not have been the most important during wartime, there were airbases, and Dishforth has quite a bit of history to cover. However, the parish boundaries here split the former airfield into two pieces, and as a result of that, we'll talk more about the airbase in next week's episode, but we'll still see part of it here. Instead, this video will focus more on the village itself. Dishforth is typical North Yorkshire. It's a linear affair laid out along one main street with a back lane. It's grown a bit since the turn of the 20th century. The western portion of the place is now full of new builds, and a brand new junction complex with the A168 gives Dishforth easy access to the motorway network. It has no church these days, but the former church building is still in use. There are two pubs, a school, an old chapel, a sports ground, and a few other interesting bits in this one. Let's have a wander and see them all. We start on a country lane called Mowbray Avenue, which in pre-war times used to run between Dishforth and Borough Bridge. Dishforth Airfield is now built over part of the road, and it opened in 1936. Although no longer an airbase, it's still controlled by the MOD, and there's no public access. We can only see bits of it from this sports ground. Sports-wise, the Playing Field and Sports Association, which looked after this, is no longer active, but it hasn't been totally disbanded. Dishforth Bowls Club remain the only active club using the facilities at this sports pavilion by the roadside. Okay, so as I said in commentary there, we will talk more about the airfield in next week's episode because it straddles the boundary between Dishforth and the one that's to the south. And the one to the south is so small that it really needs to be talked about in that episode to give it a bit more ballast, if you like, because if I just went for the village on its own, it would be an extremely short episode. So we'll cover the airfield in next week's video. So for now then, we're going to head back up this lane past the sports field and past the sports sports ground and the pavilion and all that kind of stuff, and head into Dishforth village itself and have a lovely little walk around in this late June sunshine. Our main walk begins on Grange Close, a set of houses built between the 1930s and 50s off Back Lane. This is where we find our first landmark, Dishforth Primary School, a small, friendly Church of England establishment. Children here are taught in 4 classes. There are 2 schools in the vicinity of Dishforth, the other one is on the airfield, and it's located within the parish of Norton-le-Clay. Although Grange Close is a dead end, it is possible to walk through the school's car park to get to Baines Drive. This brand new housing estate has expanded the village's population greatly in recent times. Baines Drive is named after the Baines Bat, the 2-seater aircraft which was first flown at Sherburn in Elmet. In fact, most of these streets have some sort of connection to flying machines. Both Horser Way and Hamilcar Close are named for types of glider, which would have often been towed into the sky by Halifax bombers. At the end of the road you hit Main Street, which is sometimes referred to as Leeming Lane. This is the only way into and out of the village and provides it with a great link to both the A1 and the A168 Dishforth bypass at an interchange just west of here. You can catch a bus here. There are 4 that serve this village, but only one is a public bus, the number 70. The rest are for local schools. That stop is close to the impressive Vine House. Tall, imposing and mid-18th century date-wise, this is one of 12 Grade 2 listed buildings in Dishforth, all of which can be found within a long line from the bus stop down to the Crown Inn pub. It's a list that includes the vicarage and the manor house and several other grand farmhouses and historic dwellings like Westcott, Ivy Home, Holly Cottage, Laurel House and Dishforth's former church. Close to the junction with Topcliffe Lane is another religious building, the Old Methodist Chapel, which appears to be residential now. In much the same way as the one we met in Copt Hewick, there's not a lot out there about this one. I couldn't even pin down a construction date. No matter, let's move on and head up Topcliffe Lane for a short way. This is a dead end these days because when the A168 bypass was built, it split the road into 2 pieces. At its limit is Dishforth Cemetery and a garden centre. Otherwise, it's more housing, modern cul-de-sacs like Gables Court, for example. So on the whole, we haven't really seen much in the way of major landmarks, but that's generally speaking because they're all clustered together to the south of Topcliffe Lane along the main street. So we need to return to that now and see what else Dishforth has for us. There's still plenty yet. We return to Main Street, or Leeming Lane if you will, where we reconvene with the older properties and listed buildings. Now, one thing that Dishforth lacks these days is a church. Although one still stands in the village today, it's not used for worship. Instead, it's the village hall. Formerly Christ Church, this replaced a former village hall on Back Lane. Funding for its conversion came from the sale of the old site. The project took 3 years to complete, but it was finally opened in 2009. As a church, it was built in 1791 before being restored and extended in 1880 by a G. Mallinson of Ripon. Next to the church is a war memorial. As well as this, Dishforth Cemetery on Topcliffe Lane has some 78 Commonwealth war graves, many of whom were airmen and members of the Royal Canadian Air Force in World War II. Crown Farmhouse is next, and this shares its name with a pub over the road. In fact, there are 2. The Crown Inn is narrow and traditional, and Saturdays are often curry nights here. Next to it is the Black Swan, a white-fronted building with bay windows that's a much more family-orientated affair. Their proximity to each other make them 2 of the closest pubs in Yorkshire. From this point onwards, Dishforth becomes residential and the listed buildings run out. The road eventually bends to the right before becoming Mowbray Avenue. Now, this episode was filmed during Euro 2024, so there were plenty of England flags flying. It's good to see the locals were lending their support to the 3 Lions. As mentioned earlier, Dishforth only has one way in and one way out of it, thanks to the A168 bypass. There are roads off this main street, like Lingham Lane for example, but none of them go anywhere except deep into the North Yorkshire countryside. And Lingham Lane is in much the same way as the road that leads down to where the sports ground is and the entrance to the airfield. It's a dead end, and that means that the whole of Dishforth is a dead end. No matter where you go in the village, you're not going to find your way out unless you go back to the junction at the top of the place, close to the A168 and the A1. And we're going to head back towards that junction now via Back Lane, which will take us back towards the primary school and complete the circuit of this lovely little village. So, in keeping with many a similar village which has a back lane, Dishforth's version is simply the lane running parallel to the main street, and likely originated as a rudimentary farm track. Now a lot more built up, Back Lane is much more modern than the main street. Halfway along its length, you'll come to what appears to be a patch of waste ground. This was the site of the old village hall, a dilapidated wooden hut torn down in favour of the converted church. Not a lot has happened with this site since. When it was sold for £271,000, there were plans to build 2 new houses here. Further up the road we have a farm building or two, underlining Dishforth's agricultural roots. Dishforth began life as a simple farming village, but gradually its number of agricultural workers has declined in favour of the modern commuter, and being so close to the A1 is a massive draw for many. You can tell that this lane was never designed for a lot of traffic. In places it's narrow and only wide enough for one vehicle at a time. I guess though any traffic that does use this road is coming down here for a specific reason, as it can't get to anywhere else. We're back to the start now. And there we are all the way around Dishforth village. But of course we haven't finished with Dishforth yet, because the airfield is still a thing. And like I said at the top, that will be covered in the next episode, because it straddles the boundary between Dishforth and the one to the south. So I'd better get on and get to the one to the south, hadn't we? Because that way I can make the video. See you later. With that, we are done with Dishforth, at least for now. Don't forget the airfield will be covered in next week's episode, owing to the fact it straddles the parish boundary with the next in the series. I was to head there next, via Ripon, for the night. Come back soon and see what Dishforth Airfield is all about. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.